loves, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing my January and February books roundup. So this is my pile, but they're all upside down because I have them in the order I'm going to talk about them. Book Club has also voted on the next few months' book club picks. So for January and February, it was The Employees by Olga Ravn and In the Distance by Hernan Diaz, which I was very happy to reread. We've got Pedro, Páramo as our April pick, which I am really looking forward to. I think it's going to be a strange, sort of dreamlike experience, just a slim little novel. And I think it will really benefit from discussion. I think it's one of those. For May, we're doing The Mercies by Kiran, Millwood, Hargrave, which is historical fiction. And then for June, we are doing East of Eden by John Steinbeck. So we're going to do a modern classic. I made a short list of all modern classics for us to pick from. So yes, those are our three picks, all of which I'm very excited about. And of course, there are also some other mini book club picks going on as well. Before we get further into the video, I would like to thank today's sponsor, which is Skillshare. You all know I have been using and loving Skillshare to just increase my skills. I've been doing this job for a very long time, but actually there were a few areas which I really thought I could brush up on some skills with. And I've got this feeling at the moment, I don't know if it's that beginning of the year, moving into springtime, rejuvenation feeling, where I just want to unlock some new creativity. And I am doing probably my favourite learning path that I have done yet with Skillshare. So Skillshare is an online learning community. They have thousands of classes from all sorts of creative professionals, ranging from the actual creative parts, you know, illustration, animation, creative writing, graphic design, all of that kind of stuff, through to the more business side of things, the entrepreneurship side of things. A really, really helpful resource for any of those of you who are wanting to take up a new creative hobby and or, you know, start a small business of your own. It is a fantastic resource and they really have access to some of the best professionals out there. There's loads of classes and courses that you can do, but they also curate these learning paths. They'll draw classes from various different professionals and different topics, and they'll put them into one learning path where you can follow along and build your skills as you go. And so the one I've been enjoying recently is called Procreate Basics, Get Started with Digital Illustration. I've had Procreate for many, many years, but I watched the first class on this yesterday and I learned so many new techniques that you can use with Procreate that I had no idea you could do, and that are really, really helpful, especially for me who has always felt a little bit lacking in the sort of art department in terms of my ability to draw. But Procreate really has so much support built into it for people like me, so anyone can use it, and of course really amazing artists also use it. And yeah, I'm just loving this learning path. I think I'm going to get a lot of use out of it. And as usual, the first 500 people to use the link down below will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So yes, I hope some of you make the most of that. But in the meantime, let's get back to the book. Starting with Ed Yong's An Immense World, How Animal Senses Reveal the Hidden Realms Around Us. This is just an absolutely wonderful non-fiction book. We read it for our reference section mini book club, which is non-fiction dedicated. And it's building on our shared love in the book club for these non-fiction books about nature and giving us new perspectives on the world around us. And yes, this is the sort of animal puzzle piece of that. So in this book, Yong examines the umwelts of various different animals around us. An umwelt being the sensory bubble that we all live in. So of course, everything we know about the world is told to us via our senses, and different creatures have different senses, all live sort of within our own umwelts. And this book is Yong attempting to get us a way into understanding other senses, other umwelts, other ways of being on this shared planet, because we all are sort of like aliens to each other in that sense. And he covers loads and loads of ground here. I think the path he takes through the senses is very well done and makes a lot of sense. We start with chemical senses and also stuff that's a little bit more familiar. And then we end with sort of electric fish and electromagnetic sense. That's how it's structured. And it's just wonderful. His writing style is really readable, accessible. He toes that line and gets that balance perfect of being very informative and, you know, having genuinely very interesting insights into the world via the scientists that he speaks to, but also keeping it accessible, keeping it readable, making it understandable. And he's a journalist, and he just writes in this really, it's quite a warm way as well. There's some jokes in here, there's some lightness, and it just all works really, really well. It really, really captured me. I absolutely flew through it, and I have thought about it so much since I put it down. I think because of its lightness, I didn't realise how much of an impact it had made on me. But as I say, I think about it so often. It obviously has a lot of relevance to a lot of speculative fiction, because that's what speculative fiction authors who deal in other beings and other life forms are doing a lot of the time, which is imagining how another being's senses or body structure might inform the way they interact with the world around us and what new things they might show us in the way they do that. It's basically what I wrote my entire dissertation on when I did it on Jemisin's Broken Earth. Yeah, I suppose it already builds on a lot of ideas that I already love anyway. I think it will change the way you see the world. It definitely changed the way I see dogs, if nothing else. I mean, it covers so many different animals, but even just the beginning chapter on the dog's sense of smell and how it works, and you know, how they perceive the world, so interesting. One that I don't have a physical copy of yet, but it is one of the more beautiful books from this pile for sure, and that is Witness by Jamel Brinkley. I am not going to be so good chatting about this one because I listened to quite a lot of it. So I started reading this one on my e-reader as an ARC, which was very kindly given to me, but I just couldn't make progress with it because I had to prioritize a bunch of other stuff. So I was like, let me switch to the audiobook version, then I might actually be able to read more, listen more, because I really liked the opening stories that I read. I thought they were so good. In fact, I think certainly the opening story is probably one of the strongest in the collection overall. And in general, I'm quite glad that I did that half and half thing. I'm glad I didn't just go in listening, because I don't think I would have appreciated maybe the depth to Brinkley's writing that exists there in it, because he has this quite quiet, calm style that belies those inner depths, and it's just a really good short story collection. When I discover an author like this, they go straight on my list of authors to watch because they are a rarity. So it's about people living in New York, and it's just stories of friendships, families, brief touching of strangers, and he's exploring themes of intergenerational trauma informed by the Black American experience. He's exploring themes of loneliness and grief, and structural racism, gentrification, mental illness, and also, of course, witnessing, because the book is called Witness. So there's so much going on here, and into it he also adds a touch of the speculative. Sometimes it's barely there, sometimes it is much more overt. I can't remember if it goes through literally every story, I'm not sure that it does, but he manages that balance so well. Again, very hard to do, to include the speculative without it being a little bit like it was, say, in Northwoods, which is sort of a peg to hang all the themes on and let that do the work. He incorporates it much more naturally into these stories. Also, the stories are good. You know, they have tension to them, they build nicely. They sometimes have that uncanny sense, which I love so much. In general, I think he's a real gem. I think he released one collection before this, which I would like to read, but I would like to read anything else that he publishes. I'm very intrigued. I think his prose is beautiful. Loved it. One of our book club picks now, this is The Employees by Olga Ravn, and I had to get my hands on this water cooler edition because I just think it is so cool. So this is a selection of statements, can you see, given to a committee by some employees. But all is not as it seems. So some of these employees are human, some of them are humanoid, and they're all on a spaceship. And the spaceship, oh my goodness, I just had to look up the word orbit, so that's where my brain's at today. But the spaceship is orbiting a planet, an alien planet, we presume. And the committee has been tasked with finding out what effects the objects are having on the employees. So the objects are things that have been ostensibly found on this planet and brought into the spaceship and sort of displayed as art objects. And this book was supposed to be just a one-page addition to an art installation of a friend of Ravn's. And she very quickly then just wrote an entire book inspired by this art. So it's definitely worth looking that up. There's a great interview with her about the way that came about and about the book itself. So definitely worth reading, because I think it adds something to the reading of this book for sure. All we get are these statements, we don't get anything else. And it is very strange, weird, pretty vague, frustrates quite a lot of readers, I think. It's very easy to just fly through this and just think, what on earth happened? I have no idea. And what did it all mean? Who cares? But because we were doing it for book club, I was really looking closely, and it led to some fantastic discussion. So many interesting ideas in here about being human. Of course, we're looking at humans and humanoids. The book doesn't make a distinction in terms of like how it presents the statements to you. So in some it's very obvious that it's a human speaking, in others it's obvious it's a humanoid, but in some it's not obvious at all. There is something that sort of happens toward the end of the book, which is your plot. But I won't spoil it for you all. But yeah, the concept of the objects, so interesting. What are the objects? What effects are they having on the humans and humanoids? And is it different between the two? All of these things, I think if you don't read this with someone else, which we did, and therefore it made it even better, you should kind of be in discussion with yourself when you read it, because it really, really opens up and broadens the horizons of this book. It's wonderfully weird in ways that I love and enjoy. I feel like Vandermeer may have even blurbed this. Yes, he did. There's a great moment in the interview where Ravn's just like, I wish I could write something normal, but everything just comes out so weird. I just thought, yep, you're one for me. Yeah, I really want to read more of her work. Another book that's going to be nigh on impossible to talk about. Yes, so this is Little Big. It's by John Crowley. It's kind of a cult classic within the speculative fiction genre. It's a fantasy. So I'm gonna read you some quotes. Neil Gaiman said it's one of the greatest novels of the 20th century. Le Guin called it indescribable, and a book that all by itself calls for a redefinition of fantasy. So I'm with Le Guin there. It is a really, really difficult book to describe. It's about a man named Smokey Barnable, or at least we begin with him. He's going from the city, which we can kind of assume is New York City, to Edgewood, which we can kind of assume is upstate New York, to get married to a woman called Alice Drinkwater, who he's only met once, and he has to do these strange things on the way there, like he can only bring food from home, he can't buy any food, and I don't know, he's given a bunch of rules for his journey. I think he can't take the car, he has to walk, all these kind of things. And he's going to go to Edgewood, he's going to get married and immerse himself in this family, in this world. He's described as an anonymous man to begin with. Like, he kind of relishes the idea of losing himself within this family, at least at first, and becoming someone. And so, yes, it's about the family, and it's about Edgewood, and it's actually about the city as well, and the dichotomy between the two. And yeah, so Smokey arrives, and he begins to realise that maybe this family believes in fairies. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Does he believe in fairies? He's not sure. And so, yeah, you can already begin to imagine how this book may irritate some readers when you first scroll on some of the most recent reviews of it. They're not amazing because, yes, this novel, at least for the first 300 of its 500 pages, it's quite meandering. It's dreamlike, it's strange, it moves from scene to scene in a dreamlike way with what seems like very little through line, but then the plot does pick up in a way that surprised me by the time I got to it, actually. But yeah, Edgewood itself is really interesting and strange. It has this house with like 6 different facades, and the inside seems bigger than the outside, and lots of interesting stuff going on there, which I think it's funny because I read a negative review of this book, which is like, this book doesn't do what I want, what I love about House of Leaves, which is explore the concept of the house. But it's funny because I think House of Leaves is quite an empty metaphor, and it doesn't really come to any like finality with how it describes the house, whereas I think this one actually has a lot more depth and a lot more layers, and I think it describes that sort of strange house structure much better. But anyway, yeah, so I tried to work out how this book functions and why it feels so enchanting, because it really does feel enchanting. It feels like you're being put under a spell yourself when you read it, at least if you find its rhythm, if you find its because it does have a through line, it does have a beat, and if you manage to latch onto it, yeah, it feels magic. I mean, it really does. I think in many ways this is an American novel. Imagine those words with, you know, capitalized, the American novel, in the fantasy mode. And it's trying to really capture America at this particular period. This was released in the early 80s, so kind of 70s through to 80s. I think it's really interesting as a historical artifact on that front as well. The fairy stuff is done in a really interesting, unusual way. But yeah, it's not going to be for everyone. It has all the hallmarks of being written by a white guy in the 80s, so there's something in here to offend everybody, I feel. It's not like deeply embedded absolutely everywhere, but it's just, you know, there's a sentence here and there which is going to make you cringe. It depends on how you feel about that kind of thing in literature at this period. It's disgustingly difficult to avoid. Do check any kind of content warnings if you are concerned about anything. But yeah, I really recommend trying to read this one a little bit quicker than I did. I read it over quite a few weeks over the Christmas period, and it didn't help, I don't think. You know, you have to like keep going with it, otherwise you do lose the thread of it a little bit. So yeah, try and make some time with this one if you do want to give it a go. But yeah, it's did I even say this? It's like a generational family story, so we cover 3 generations, and I found the ending really quite moving actually by the time we got there. So yeah, I instantly want to reread this. I found it's a very unique novel, and I can see why it's a cult classic. I can see why all the other speculative fiction authors love it, revere it, think of it as important. But yes, enter at your own risk with this one. Next we have In the Distance by Hernan Diaz. Of course, what more do I need to say about this book, because I've talked about it so much over the last 5 years. It's been 5 years since I first read it, which feels mad if that has passed so quickly. But it's about Håkan. He is a young Swedish boy, and him and his brother are supposed to be travelling to New York. And when they get to Portsmouth, Håkan gets on the wrong boat and he ends up going to California instead. And so he makes plans to try and, you know, walk across the entire country to New York. So this is obviously a devastating start to the book. And yeah, this one was much loved by everyone for book club. Again, led to some wonderful discussion. Really just, I don't know, there's something so touching, personal about this book. And it kind of reminded us of An Ascension in that respect, even though they're both very, very different in content. But yeah, it's obviously a Western, but the way Diaz writes about landscape and how it interacts with Håkan and his experiences and his deep loneliness and his alienation from other people and life and his anxieties and his pain and his grief. It is a lot, but very, very beautifully done. I mean, just the sentences, some of them are just stunning. If you get through to the end of this one, it can be a little bit meandering, it can be a little bit cyclical, definitely on purpose. But when you get to the end of this one, it's hard not to feel Håkan impressed upon your heart forever. So yes, loved it again, recommend it again. So I only read one of these 3 novels by Yuri Herrera, which was Signs Preceding the End of the World. And I would like to read the other 2. Sadly, I didn't have time in January and February, but it's really tiny. I mean, it must be like 100 pages or so. And it's about Makina, and she's travelling across the Mexico-US border to go and retrieve her brother. And in order to do that, she has to descend into an underworld, basically, peopled with, you know, threatening characters, strange characters, and she has to put her life in their hands. But she is a very strong, resilient character. She's a wonderful character, actually. And yeah, she experiences, of course, all that comes with crossing a border in such a manner. What does that do to your sense of self? What does it do to your sense of your language? And also the kind of culture shock, and how does she reckon with the things that she finds across the border? So there's a lot going on here in a short amount of pages, and somehow Herrera manages to make this teensy little novel / novella into something epic feeling. I don't know if it's because he draws on these sort of mythical feelings, but it does feel epic. It feels expansive, even though it's so short. So many just absolutely stunning paragraphs in there. I raced through 10 Planets last year, but I found my mind returning to it again and again, which is a sci-fi selection of short stories that he wrote. Just really a really interesting author doing something slightly different with his work. I highly recommend this little slip of a novel, but I would definitely like to read the other two because he considers them a sort of informal trilogy. So that's Kingdom Cons and also The Transmigration of Bodies. Looking forward to reading more Herrera for sure, and I'm also looking forward to seeing what he publishes next. It took me about a year to get through this big anthology in the end. This is New Daughters for Africa, edited by Margaret Busby, and it's a selection of over 200 pieces of black women's writing. And this is the second, obviously it's called New Daughters of Africa. There was an original Daughters of Africa which came out in the 90s, and she doesn't cross over between the two. So this is a wholly new selection of women. So I would of course like to now go back to the original one, which has a lot of familiar names in as well. Range here, which is incredible. You read something like this for the range. We have essays, fiction, poems, speeches, extracts from plays or scripts, articles, just so many forms of writing. The breadth of experience is obviously incredible. We're looking at, you know, women from across the diaspora. I don't know why I was expecting it to be more fiction. It was more essays, I think, than it was anything else. Based on my personal tastes, I would have enjoyed a little bit more fiction probably, and I think probably for licensing reasons as well. She couldn't always get her hands on like specific things that you would expect from certain contributors. But overall, just as I say, an incredible experience just to get that range, get that breadth. I added a lot of new authors to my list of writing to look out for, to watch for. I added new books to my TBR. Of course, some pieces were more successful than others. That's the way with any anthology, but particularly one as big as this. But yes, overall, quite an amazing experience. And I will continue to read anthologies. I think they're such an important part of my reading life now. Next we have another little novella. This is The Arrival of Missives by Aliya Whiteley. And yeah, it's short. There's an extra little story on the back of mine, so it's even shorter than it looks. It's set in the interwar period in England, in the southwest, and it's about a girl named Shirley Fern who wants to, it says on the back here, challenge the conventions of rural England. She is a very upstanding young woman. She wants to be a teacher. She wants to further her education. She wants to look beyond the purview of her little village. But also she is in love with her teacher, Mr. Tiller, who is a veteran from the war. And she also kind of wants to come back and marry him once she's done her education and become a teacher herself. And they can live as teachers together. That's how we open the book. So she has this quite forthright tone of voice, which is a little bit distancing, I think, in terms of you feel a bit distanced from the character of Shirley. She's a little annoying in the way that some teenagers can be, but I think it was intentional for sure. But yeah, so it's a sci-fi. So she finds out something about Mr. Tiller, and I really enjoyed the conclusion and sort of the message of this book is hidden within the title, The Arrival of Missives. But will it stick with me for a long time? I'm not sure. I think it was just probably a little bit too short to really get my teeth into it. It's got this good kind of weird pew-like section, which is around the May Day celebration. But yeah, I didn't end this one completely enamoured with it, but it's an interesting little read, and I would be intrigued as to what Whiteley does next, also because the ending story was quite different. Next we have The Sparrow, which led our buddy read to have very mixed reactions, although in general I think we came to mostly the same conclusion. So a lot of us enjoyed the reading of this, including myself. I found it compelling, gripping. I think Russell has a really natural writing style. She writes about the chemistry between her characters really well. If you don't know, this is a sci-fi that was published in the 90s, and so it deals a little bit in 2019 and beyond us. So it's interesting to read about what her conception of our period of time would have looked like. The underlying ideology of this book is questionable in the extreme. So ultimately, I don't really feel like I'm in a place to recommend it. And actually, I do think it has some technical problems as well. But it is easy to get wrapped up, I think, in her story. I think she's a good storyteller. She builds the tension of the plot very well throughout the book. And as I say, she has like a natural writing style, smooth writing style. Easy to gloss over her agenda a little bit in this book, but yeah, it is problematic. So it's about a Jesuit mission to an alien planet. An alien planet has been discovered, and in fact we spend quite a lot of the first part of the novel building up to that moment. It's not a spoiler to say that it happens though, because we are in the present moment with a particular priest, Emilio, who something terrible has happened to him on this alien planet, and we don't know what it is until the very end. And even all the priests around him are trying to work out what it is. And he's come back in disgrace, like he is said to have been involved in atrocities, basically, on this planet. And so, yeah, we're building the backstory and finding out what happened throughout the book. It's a Jesuit mission to this alien planet, and this group of friends really accidentally is able to go on this trip together, which is one of the weirder parts of this book in general. The science and stuff, you wouldn't read it for that. And like the realism on that front is minimal. And yeah, it all goes terribly wrong, basically. And it's a little bit, Russell apparently wrote it in response to, celebrating the 500th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the New World. And she said that there was a great deal of historical revisionism going on as we examine the mistakes made by Europeans when they first encountered foreign cultures in the Americas and elsewhere. It seemed unfair to me for people living at the end of the 20th century to hold those explorers and missionaries to the standards of sophistication and tolerance that we hardly manage even today. I wanted to show how very difficult first contact would be, even with the benefit of hindsight. That's when I decided to put modern, sophisticated, resourceful, well-educated and well-meaning people in the same position as those early explorers and missionaries. So yeah, it's kind of a defense of colonialism, which we don't like. And once you know that, it's kind of obvious in the plot as well. Yes, the way the peoples they encounter on Rakat, which is what it's called, are treated, described, is pretty bad, I think, from both a sci-fi perspective. They're quite human-like, but also from a colonialism perspective, it's just all not great. Not to mention, it reminds me of A Little Life in the way it was very exploitative towards its characters, just for, emotional heft, I suppose, and not really for any proper reason. It doesn't really further the plot or the themes. It just seems to be there to torture them. So overall, not a massive success. Yes, can't really recommend it. Another book I don't have, which is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. I have barely thought about this tome of a novel, like it's hundreds of pages long, since I put it down, apart from to think about a couple of things that were wrong with it. So that's not a great sign. In general, I just think it's a little bit forgettable. So we're following the devolution, basically, of a nice, respectable Irish family. They're all falling apart, basically. Chaos ensues because of a number of things that sort of trigger old past traumas and memories. And yeah, the bulk of the book is made up of 4 sections which describe and are from the point of view of each of these family members. The best of these is definitely the mother's, Imelda. She gives us a lot of the best backstory, and it's just the most interesting character, probably. There's a little bit of climate crisis stuff in there, which we appreciate for a contemporary novel. I would say it needed some editing. It rambles on for a little bit too long, and it has a kind of ambitious ending. But yeah, it had some uncomfortable undercurrents which I couldn't quite reconcile, especially in a novel which is so much of like contemporary now. I'm like, we should be expecting a little bit more of our authors now. So there was an odd treatment of an immigrant character, basically the only foreign character in the book, non-Irish character in the book, and he was just described in no uncertain terms as like pure evil. He's there as a plot point to be evil and to just, spread darkness amongst this family and this community, which I just think is a very strange treatment of an immigrant character, especially when you're going to address some contemporary issues, but you're not going to address that issue. of immigration and why people might be immigrating. I also thought its dealings with queer culture were uncomfortable. It was difficult to tell where the line was between Murray and his characters, and it just didn't quite work for me. Didn't feel right. So yeah, I'm sure Murray didn't intend these things, but nonetheless they are there in ways that I didn't appreciate. Either way, I think it's safe to skip this one. I don't, for me, not know the pinnacle of great contemporary lit. So I read Beyond the Deepwoods in a fit of nostalgia. It's a middle grade book, and I used to love these Edge Chronicles as a kid. And when I was rearranging my shelves, as you may have seen in the video, which I made about it, I just couldn't help but read like the first chapter of this and just feel nostalgic about it. It's got the most incredible, so it's written by Paul Stewart, but it has the most incredible illustrations throughout by Chris Riddell, who also does a lot of like illustration for like Neil Gaiman and stuff, or has done over the years. Just really, really cool. And unfortunately, it did let me down a little bit, not just because, you know, I generally read adult novels, not middle grade books, but it was really episodic to the point of like absolute distraction. So in each chapter, Twig would get into some sort of disaster, and then he would get himself out, and then we back into another disaster in the next chapter. Like the opening was really promising. It's quite atmospheric. It's got quite a lot of like wonderful world building writing. But yeah, then we got into this middle section, which was just like disaster after disaster after disaster, and then again a little bit more potential towards the end. But I have read from reading the reviews of later books, even just the second book, the one after this, that they get into their stride a little bit more together in the next books, and they have a lot more like of a through line and story structure. So I do kind of want to read the next one and continue with the series and with rereading the series. I know Inez is still very young, but I do have this urge to return to a lot of those books I loved as a kid, so I know what I still want to recommend to her when the time comes. So I think I probably will continue with this, but this one itself was a little bit of a disappointment. Final book, disappointing, very similar reasons. In fact, my whole experience, I imagine, is going to be similar, but that's The Colour of Magic by Terry Pratchett. When I read series, especially from beloved authors like this, I always want to start from the top with publishing order. So this is the first of Pratchett's Discworld books, but it is well known that the first couple books are not that great, and certainly not up to Pratchett's eventual standards. So again, I was disappointed with this one for just being so episodic. Again, disaster after disaster after disaster, very little rest time between disasters, very little time with the characters in more quiet, reflective moments, which I enjoy. Generally, very little overarching story. It's this book was originally written as a parody of contemporary fantasy, I think, and you can see that, like, he's obviously kind of taking a piss out of other fantasy that's obviously being published at the time. But yeah, I think he then goes on to actually find his own voice in his writing. So I will definitely continue with Discworld. I know that not to expect too much from the next one either. But that is everything, my loves. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm now going to put these books away. They've been sat on my desk for months, so I'm very much, some of them for a long time, so I'm really looking forward to putting them away back on the shelves where they belong. And yes, I hope you enjoyed. I will see you again very soon. I've been reading lots more great books that I can't wait to share with you. So yeah, see you soon. Bye.